Hey everybody, Joe from Home Crush here. How the hell you doing? I'm doing freaking fantastic.
And I only have two words: frickin' fantastic every single day. It sets the bar.
Well, it's been a minute since I posted a YouTube video, huh?
One eternity later.
I think it's been almost 2 years since I reviewed 3 of Meike's full-frame cinema lenses. The 24, the 50, and the 85. I still consider these 3 focal lengths to constitute the basic set that covers the vast majority of narrative shooting. But since then, I have added 3 more of the lenses to my kit, the 16, the 35, and the 135. Why did I do that? Well, mostly because in addition to using the lenses myself, I rent them out, and a lot of people wanted in particular the 35. Also, the 3 empty holes in the case were kind of bugging me. Since I have the extra focal lengths, I use them. And since I use them, I wanted to learn exactly how they compare and contrast. And if I'm going to do all that testing, I might as well share it with you. So here we are. I hope you find this useful. Now, before we get to the tests and sample shots, I've got some housekeeping.
Each of us picks up after himself.
Number 1, this is a long video.
2,000 years later.
So I've put loads of chapter markers in the description below. You won't hurt my feelings if you skip ahead. Number 2, if you're as nerdy as me, you may have noticed that I have 6 lenses here in front of me, but there are 7 lenses in Meike's set. I decided not to buy the 100mm, partly because it's so close to the 85 and the 135, but frankly, a big reason I skipped it is because Meike's case only holds 6 lenses. It just wasn't going to be practical to rent all 7 without buying a new case, which I don't feel like doing. Now, in the interest of completeness, I did give Meike the opportunity to loan me the 100mm for this review, but they declined. So this is only a very nearly complete review. Number 3, in the process of testing all these lenses, I've documented all the differences between them. And where possible, I've encapsulated corrections into DaVinci Resolve POWERGRADES. These POWERGRADES not only neutralize any color differences, they even out exposure, contrast, and even correct vignetting and lens distortion. I dare say these POWERGRADES make these 6 lenses match as well as any set could. You can find a link to them for free in the description below. You're welcome. Number 4, I need to give a few shout outs. First and foremost, huge thanks to the immensely talented Kristen Dambrino. She allowed me to use her new music video, Paradise, to test all of these lenses. It's linked below. In addition to the multitude of shots for the actual video, she allowed me to do 12 different takes just for this lens test. I also want to thank Seth Christian from Renegade. He not only brought out his 2-ton grip truck, he worked all day with me as a gaffer, first AC, and really a co-DP. If you're crewing in the Nashville area, definitely look him up. Links below. Okay, with all that preamble out of the way, let's get to the lenses. The Meike full-frame cinema lenses all feature an all-metal build, including iris and focus gears machined right into the metal. Markings are inscribed in high-visibility yellow, imperial on one side, metric on another. But the iris markings are only on the operator side. I would much prefer that it had those markings on the assistant side too. I also wish the markings were glow-in-the-dark. Now, these are minor quibbles, but I'll take any little bit of help on a busy set. All the lenses are similar in height and weight, but they're not identical. So if you use a swing-away matte box, you'll need to adjust it for at least for the 16 and the 135. Regardless, the iris and focus gears do line up across the lineup, so you can swap lenses without having to worry about moving motors. For gimbal work, the differences in length and weight may or may not matter depending on the strength of your gimbal's motors. I use a Ronin RS3, and I can get away with only balancing once for the 50mm, which is kind of in the middle of the range. All the lenses feature good long focus throws, but there is noticeable variation in stiffness from lens to lens. Because I only have one copy of each lens, I don't know if all 24s are as loose as mine, or if that's just that my copy of this 24 is looser than the rest of my lenses. What I can tell you is that the difference from lens to lens is more than I would like. Like I said, my 24 is pretty loose, while my 85 here is like really stiff. The others are all pretty much the same. So, I mean, this is far from a deal breaker, especially at this price point, but I did think it was worth noting. All the lenses come with shims, but they also focus past infinity. So unless you need your marks to be critical, there's not really a need to shim them. And let's be honest, in 2023, I mean, how many people are focusing by marks versus focusing with a monitor? While we're talking about build, let me veer off topic for just a second and mention how much I like the METABONES locking EF adapter. A lot of inexpensive EF mount adapters have considerable play in them. The METABONES does cost more, but being able to lock down the lens, similar to how a PL mount works, it really helps when working with high torque focus motors. So highly recommended. I think the last thing I want to say about the physical characteristics of these lenses is a note about their size. So the Meike full frames are what you would consider compact cinema lenses. And compact cinema lenses kind of sit in an awkward space. This isn't unique to Meike, but really all of them. They're big and heavy enough that, I mean, this adds considerable bulk to a minimal handheld rig. And they're chunks to carry around on a one-handed gimbal setup.
Jeez, mister.
You don't want to be doing that all day. But conversely, they're short enough that it actually makes for cramped quarters trying to get everything in front of a fully rigged cinema build. These are all-around do-anything lenses. So just understand that they're not physically optimized for either extreme. Again, this isn't unique to the Meikes. I'd have the same comment about any compact cinema lenses. Okay. Let's get into the optical characteristics. First, let's look at the different fields of view offered by each lens. Throughout this test, the camera is stationary, about 3 meters from Kristen. The only change is the lens. On a full-frame camera, 16mm is just ludicrously wide, but it could be a lifesaver in extremely cramped quarters.
Tell me, honey, what are you afraid of? Is it the threat of being known completely, or the threat of the truth? Forget it, you got some pills in your pocket and you take them as needed for the feelings. Forget it, it's just a chemical imbalance, so you're numb out to.
The 135 allows for some really tight close-ups without being all up in your talents biz.
I got a feeling that you don't know why. Paradise is hell. I got a feeling that you don't know why. 'Cause when it starts to feel too good, I set a fire to your neighborhood, and it's all right. You could say that I'm a lost little junkie, and I won't argue with you.
Now let's do the opposite. Let's move the camera each time we swap lenses to maintain the same relative framing of Kristen's face. Note how as we go wider and wider, the relative difference between the camera and her facial features grows. Objectively, this exaggerates or distorts her face. Subjectively, the longer focal lengths feel kind of safe or removed. The shorter focal lengths feel more intimate or uncomfortable. We sense the camera distance and ascribe meaning to it.
Paradise is here. I got a feeling that you don't know why. Cause when it starts to feel too good, I set a fire to your neighborhood, and it's alright. You could say that I'm a lost little junkie. I won't argue with you, but you willingly believe me, darling. I'm in your use and dress too. Forget it, you got your doctor on speed dial and you're screening all your mother's calls.
Now, neither of those showcase anything unique to the Meike lenses, but I always like to include them as a reminder of how and why you might choose a particular lens for how it feels, even if space doesn't dictate you use it. You can use a telephoto lens for a wide shot. You can use a wide angle for a close-up. It's all about what helps tell the story best. All right, now let's nerd out for a bit with charts. Minimum focus. I found the published minimum focus distances to be pretty close to my results, even though I'm using an adapter. Again, not really a need to shim these lenses. Sharpness. I shot these charts at 8K on a Sony Alpha 1. One of, if not the most detailed sensors you can buy. So suffice it to say, all of the Meike lenses are more than sharp enough to resolve whatever detail your camera can. Yeah, there's some differences between T-stops and in the corners, but they're small enough to only be noticeable on charts. While there are practical reasons why you might not want to shoot wide open, namely how hard it is to pull focus, for the Meike lenses, sharpness is not one of them. And of course, if you're using a high-resolution sensor, you're going to see the softening effects of diffraction at very high T-stops. Note that if you shoot these or any full-frame lens on a Super 35 sensor, your whole image will be in the lens sweet spot. Distortion. Across the board, the Meike lenses feature remarkably little distortion. Normally, the wider the lens, the more the barrel distortion, but interestingly, the Meike 35mm suffers more distortion than the 16 or the 24. In any case though, unless you're shooting architecture or something equally demanding, I see little need to correct any of the lenses. Still, I have built those corrections into my power grades. Color. Most of the Meike lenses are well color matched, except for the 85mm, which has a noticeable yellow cast. A simple white balance will get it close, but I actually had to do a good bit of nuanced corrections in my power grade to get it to truly match. And I couldn't just do it with charts because, charts feature simple, distinct colors. They're not actually a great way to spot subtle color differences. The complexity of skin tones, though, combined with how attuned our brains are for noticing differences in faces, that makes human subjects a much better guide to noting and correcting the subtle differences between these lenses. I've built these subtle corrections into all my power grades. Contrast. All the Meike lenses feature a similar contrast profile. There's some minor differences, but they were easy enough to normalize in my power grades. Brightness. I tested brightness at 2.8 because that's the minimum aperture shared by all the Meike lenses. As t-stops are to be a measure of actual transmitted light, not a theoretical number like an f-stop, we should expect that all the Meike lenses at the same t-stop should render basically the same exposure. This isn't actually the case though.
Nope.
Only the 50 and the 85 match exactly, with the 16mm almost 20% darker. While this is usually easy enough to correct in post, it is annoying that we can't trust that the t-stops are t-stops. Note, I've seen the same problem in lens sets that cost many times more than Meike's, but still, it's no excuse. Vignetting. As is to be expected, the wider the lens, the stronger the vignette. I'm not sure I'd notice it outside of testing on any of the lenses other than the 16 or the 24, but it's there. Now note if your camera has a Super 35 size sensor or crop mode, you'll crop all that vignetting away anyhow. Regardless, I've corrected for it in the power grades. Breathing. Lens breathing varies between the focal lengths, but I'd consider even the worst offenders to be no worse than average. Now, some people really get hung up on lens breathing, so decide for yourself what's acceptable, but I consider breathing to be a non-issue with the Meike lenses. Bokeh. Physics and lens design kind of dictate that bokeh varies from focal length to focal length. But in my opinion, all the Meike's out of focus rendering looks close enough that I have no problem intercutting them. The 35 and the 135 have the fussiest bokeh, but even there it isn't really noticeable unless you're shooting point lights. Otherwise, all the lenses render out of focus areas of a normal scene nice and smoothly. Flaring. The exact flare characteristics vary from lens to lens, but these are all modern coated lenses, so flaring from direct light sources is well controlled across the board. You're really going to have to work to get these lenses to flare. Veiling. I define veiling or glare as a loss of contrast from intense off-camera light. The Meike lenses all perform as I would expect. With the off-camera light source the same distance from the camera and directed straight at the lens, the wide angles veil the least and the telephoto angles veil the most. Now, in most normal cases, you won't need to flag these lenses, but if you do notice a loss of contrast, that's the solution. Chromatic aberration. All of the Meike lenses exhibit some amount of chromatic aberration, and all differently. In the real world outside of test charts, I've only ever found the need to correct the 35 and the 85 in a couple of high contrast shots, so I personally wouldn't consider any of them to be egregious offenders in this regard, but you may have less tolerance for CA than me. All right, 7 very affordable, well-built cinema lenses. I've been using these guys for quite a while now, and they handle like the day I bought them, even though they suffer God knows what kind of abuse when rented. I personally prefer using a matched set of lenses over a collection of random lenses as my daily drivers. Of course, there are always reasons to have some specialty lenses, but the biggest reason to buy a matched set of lenses for me is consistency, both in how they look and how they handle. The goal for that consistency is to translate it into efficiency and quality of work. The Meikes allow me to meet that goal for very little money. I tend to think of the Meike full-frame lenses as like clear windows. They let the camera see what's in front of it with very little interpretation. They don't have much character. Nobody's ever going to confuse them for vintage lenses. If your style is based more on those characteristic lens flaws than the fundamentals of cinematography, you are not going to like these lenses. Of course, they're not perfect. They do have their own flaws, and I have wish list items for them. But at roughly $1K each, it almost feels entitled to mention my minor quibbles. But if Meike is listening, here are the things I would address were they to make Mark IIs. In order of importance, definitely number 1 would be to color match the 85. It's easy enough to get it to roughly match the others, but if you're doing something like a 2-camera interview and you really need the 2 angles to tightly match, well, that's actually tricky unless you know what you're doing as a colorist. It'd be much better for them to change the coatings to match. Number 2, match the iris markings. If I set all lenses to T4, they should all have the same exposure, period. Simple. Number 3 would be to better match the dampening of the focus and iris rings. Now, I usually use focus motors, so this isn't really a factor, but when you really strip one down to the most minimal handheld rig, you want your muscle memory to work evenly across the lenses. And finally, number 4 would be to make the markings glow in the dark and to duplicate the iris marks on the assistant side. These are cinema lenses, and on set, the camera is often positioned in the dark, and there's usually someone working the assistant side. Now, none of these minor issues would stop me from recommending these lenses, but they are all really easy to fix. So if Meike would, I really wouldn't complain. Why not make some really good lenses really great? Whether or not Meike listens to any of my suggestions, I'm really happy to continue using these lenses as my daily tools to make the stuff I want to make. And that's what it's all about, right? It's fun to review new stuff, but it's really about the work. So get out there and crush it.